I used to have this really weird neighbor a while back. This guy loved to bake pies, and he was always giving everybody pies. They were really good, and he kind of had a legitimate reason for this weird behavior, but it was still kind of strange. He'd just show up randomly saying he baked a pie and he wanted to give you a pie. The first time I thought maybe it was poison or something, or maybe that this guy was running some kind of a weird angle. But then I talked to a couple of my neighbors and they said that's just the way he is. And when they explained why, it kind of made sense. But baking random pies and giving them to random people seemed like a very strange way to get this done. I could think of a lot of easier ways to do this. One huge problem that only tends to happen in third world countries has to do with farming. Any company that creates and sells any kind of product or service always has to innovate. You always have to think of ways to do better. You always have to be creative. You have to embrace and accept competition. For most companies, this means building products and testing them out, or coming up with new services and testing them out. But for companies that make or create seeds, it's not so easy. In order to test out a bunch of different seeds, you need a lot of land and you need a lot of time. So a lot of huge global corporations do this by kind of forcing third world farmers to be their guinea pigs, which kind of sucks if the seeds don't work out. His farmer has wasted half his land growing seeds that don't turn into anything that he can sell. And because of the massive corruption that exists between global corporations and world governments, nobody really cares if farmers are bullied into being experimental guinea pigs that might ruin them financially. If you wanted to become a chemist as a hobby, it would be pretty interesting. You could buy some equipment and supplies. You could do some experiments. You could take notes and learn what works and what doesn't. This is pretty much what you do in chemistry class. If you wanted to learn to cook as a hobby, it would be basically the same thing. Mix a bunch of stuff together, put it in the oven, and then wait for the thermodynamically driven reaction to finish and see what you made. So long as you could be patient and you were able to learn from your mistakes, you could become a pretty good cook. This is essentially what you do in cooking class. Once there was this guy that was a prepper, the kind of guy waiting for the end of the world. He and his wife lived alone, no kids, on this big plot of land. They would grow all their own food. But then one day, this guy's wife stopped talking to the neighbors. The guy said she developed some kind of psychological problems, that she was afraid of going outside. Since they weren't otherwise weird, other than being end-of-the-world doomsday preppers waiting for the apocalypse, nobody really thought about this. People just decided to accept this. People simply decided to believe this story this guy is telling. But then there was some kind of dispute, something about the land or the minerals or something. They sent out a few sheriffs and the guys to check on the mineral deposits or something. I suppose in some places you can own the land but not own the mineral rights. So anyway, while they were checking this guy's land with their equipment, they found a bunch of bones in this guy's backyard. Little pieces of bones scattered everywhere. It turns out that this guy killed his wife a long time ago, and he chopped her up and buried her in various places in his backyard. When they did the DNA test and found out all the bones came from her, at first it looked like this guy was using his wife's body as fertilizer for his yard. But then they found all kinds of occultist material and books in his house. Lots of materials for doing rituals. It turns out this guy's wife volunteered to be killed, to be used to help grow his fruit trees. They weren't just preppers, they were waiting for the Dark Lord to return. He was hoping that by killing and sacrificing his wife and being self-sufficient with the food he grew from her dead body, he would get a good place in the hierarchy after the Dark Lord returned. If you were to take up gardening as a hobby, it would be just like cooking or chemistry. mix a bunch of stuff together, wait for the organic chemical reactions to take place, and see what happened. But to be an efficient gardener, you would need to be extremely patient. You need to wait a long time. Imagine having a huge farm and being told by your government that if you don't plant the experimental seeds, the government is going to take your farm away. That is essentially what's going on in a lot of third world countries, particularly countries like India, which is precisely why a lot of farmers in India are committing suicide. They essentially give these guys two choices: give up your farm and become poor, become an outcast, or grow these experimental seeds that might not be worth squat, so you become poor and become an outcast. This is what happens when you combine the unholy powers of global corporations and corrupt governments. You get a choice between slow, painful death and slow, painful death. This guy's story is that he is a prepper, and he truly believes that the economy is going to crash soon. And the reason he is always giving pies to people is he believes that when the world ends, the only people who will survive are the people who have good relationships with their neighbors. The pies are very delicious. He keeps talking about how his wife came up with this secret ingredient, but he never tells us what that secret ingredient is. And as far as I can tell, nobody has met this guy's wife, which is kind of strange. But the pies are pretty delicious, particularly the meat pies that he makes. I don't know what kind of meat this is, but this is really, really delicious.